Hi, everyone. I'm Jean Templin, CEO of Nyack, and we are into the call. And here today, I have had the pleasure of working with Eytan, and he is an absolute pleasure to work with. And I learned lots of tricks about sales with him. And I'll go ahead and let him introduce himself. Go ahead, Eytan.
Thanks, Gene, for inviting me today. Yeah, hi, my name's Eytan Urbas. I've spent more than 25 years in the software industry, and a large majority of that has been in revenue generating commercial functions. So sales, business development. I've also held senior roles in marketing, product, and corporate strategy. So I've put my toe in a lot of waters, but the vast majority of my time has certainly been on the commercial side of software businesses.
So tell us a little bit what you're seeing out there in the trends for 2026 on the revenue generation side of the house.
hmm So I think what's obviously we're all hearing a lot about AI is the buzzword as well as that there's obviously practical applications. But what I think I'm really seeing on the revenue generation side is efforts. There's a lot of companies who are trying to build AI related tools. And I work as an advisor to a couple different university backed accelerators, and the number of AI startups that we're seeing is huge. But what I'm really seeing a lot more of that I think is a lot more practical and useful is the incorporation of artificial intelligence into existing business processes. It's the picks and shovels of the gold rush, not the panning for gold. And I think that that is where there is not only tremendous opportunity because there's really a lot that can be improved and optimized, but there's also still, even in that area, there's a lot still hype and inefficiency. Companies are trying to figure out how they want to incorporate these revolutionary new technologies, and I respect how quickly a lot of them are running forward, but I think a lot of the processes that we see in place today will probably go away within another couple of years because they may not be that efficient.
Right. So they're trying to optimize processes that we have instead of like rethinking through what would be the optimal process with this new technology.
Yeah, I think that there's some of that. I think it varies certainly by organization. I think that also there's where you see companies who are, what I don't see yet is a lot of companies eliminating roles. People talk about how many jobs is AI going to cost. I'm not seeing that on the revenue generation side, maybe on the back office side, and certainly in other corporate functions. I think that there's a lot of reality to people's concerns that AI may make some roles obsolete or diminish them, but not as much revenue generating. Right now, people still need humans in ways that they have been using humans to generate revenue. Certainly there's automated ways of buying stuff, but where people have been using humans, I don't see a lot of those going away and companies having good outcomes from doing so.
Yeah. So the human to human connection is still needed in the revenue side. And yeah, there's some tools out there like AI co-pilots or co-sellers that actually
Yeah,
help the human get better and empower them to become even better salespeople.
exactly. And I think that's particularly applicable to what I would just generically refer to as complex sales.
Right.
Non-complex sales are essentially, here's a product, here's a price, do you want to buy it? Not suggesting that that's easy, but that is pretty straightforward, a little bit more predictable. Complex sales are longer sales cycles, more consultative sales cycles, really where whatever it is that you're selling, there will probably be some implementation, some customization, something that is bespoke about getting that deal done. And that's a lot harder to automate, at least in today's technology, in today's world.
And this bespoke comes from not just processes internal on the other side, but also people, right?
Sure.
Their
Yeah.
personalities, how they like to be talked to, how they feel comfortable with the people and the products that they're selecting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So let's dive a little bit deeper in that. Like for me, that is super important. And I'm a founder, admired all, and I've worked a lot with you, the sales side and the go-to-market side of the house as a product person,
hmm
and really watching the struggle as people go through a sales cycle, which is what fascinated me to kind of start Nyack and understanding that that human connection is complex, right?
Yeah.
It's not here, I'm a CRO, you can treat me, or I'm a technical buyer, or I'm this person. Everybody works the same. And then even when you know somebody, or you feel like you have rapport with somebody, when more people are added into the equation, it changes again. Talk a little bit about that for us.
Yeah. I think that, there's areas that can be automated, particularly sales and revenue generation, particularly before the sale, research, and after the sale processes of implementation or reporting, or there's a lot that can be automated. But that in between, which is ultimately the sales part of the sales, is a lot harder to automate, at least to automate effectively, so that so the automation creates a net gain for the company. And so I think that, yeah, I would agree that that stuff really requires, particularly when you're talking about complex sales, it really requires a human connection and human skill.
Yeah, and human connections are built a lot around psychology and how we think and how our brain works. And we just had Emily, on our call on our podcast around she's a psychologist from NYU, and she
Hmm.
was talking a lot about ghosting and how it's deliberate in many ways, right?
Yeah.
When there's not a lot of skin in the games, and the red flags and different things that we should be looking for. And one of the things that stood out to me was she was saying, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is when the buyer's actually asking hard questions about the price or digging in on things, that actually means that their intent is there. They really
Yeah.
want to learn more. Do you
Yeah.
agree with that? Because some people will shy away and be like, "Oh, it's objections," and they're not interested.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think first off, on the ghosting part of it, ghosting, while it can be frustrating on the sales side, I actually always see that as a really valuable signal. The idea that people didn't see my email, they saw it. They got my voicemail, they got the email. They're choosing to not respond. And that's
Right.
because I haven't yet explained why it's sufficiently important to them. I haven't demonstrated sufficient value. So I see that as, while sometimes frustrating when you're trying to get stuff done and trying to make your numbers, it's really helpful feedback, because what's worse is the indefinite maybe, where nothing is happening. Right. Indefinite maybe, that's a sales cycle killer. That's a quarterly number killer. When even an experienced salesperson believes that they're making progress, and they may not be sometimes, and management is getting frustrated. When is that deal going to close? So ghosting is a useful signal that one needs to do something about it. And it's a
Right.
form of objection, right? To your second point, that ghosting is an objection that is just not articulated. Whereas, um,
I like that. If ghosting is an objection, that's just not articulated.
yeah, yeah. Whereas I think a lot of the other things, a lot of the other objections, I completely agree with you. That's engagement. And I think what one is shooting for in a sales function is, as you say, is creating that, whether you call it rapport or really the spirit of partnership. If one party is truly trying to take advantage of the other, yeah, you're going to hit objections. And that may not be a deal that one party wants to pursue, the buyer or the seller. Sometimes there is not this match. But if both parties are proceeding in good faith, objections are forms of progress, right? You're getting closer, you're narrowing it down. And so being able to hear those, especially because they're often articulated imprecisely. Someone says the price is too high. Okay, they're saying, I haven't demonstrated the value. Fine, we can talk about that. But a lot of other objections, well, I don't know, there's other people, there's other stuff, our dev roadmaps are really full. Those are all objections which translate to, this isn't a sufficient priority for me yet.
Talk more about, I like the term indefinite maybes. I've heard it called a couple different things, right? What signals should people be looking for indefinite maybes? Where, how do you move that forward, or how do you peg this as the indefinite maybe and put move it to a different probability in the sales funnel, or like, how do you kind of
Yeah.
understand that that's the cycle you're in?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, it is reasonable to ask for very low level commitments of your prospect. Okay. You can't ask them for the world. But for example, at the end of each call, if they are not willing to schedule the next call, you may have an indefinite maybe forming, right? Even if you can get them to schedule it, but they may say, I may not have this information. That's fine. Let's touch base by then. You begin to get a spirit of a camaraderie, a spirit of cooperation, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And so those are signals. When people tell you also that they don't have sufficient resources, that it may be true, right? But
Right.
why is that true? Either because they have not raised it, you have not raised it to a sufficient priority in their mind, they don't believe it, um, or they haven't yet sold their colleagues. So when I hear we don't have the resources for X, Y, and Z, that tells me that there are other stakeholders I need to think about, right? If if I can't get engineering resources, I can't get this, CFO won't approve it. Those are useful signals that I need to think about those other audiences. And I said, okay, let's dig into that. Who are those people? Have you told them that Have they told you they don't have resources, or are you kind of presuming that based on other meetings you've been in, and you begin
Right.
to find out how much is an objection to your value proposition versus maybe the person who is your counterparty doesn't have the juice internally to get stuff done?
Right. Right. Run the gauntlet, get it approved, do that. And
Yeah.
you're going to have to then change the way you're approaching it or give them more tools so that they feel more comfortable with that.
Yeah, and oftentimes
Right.
that relates to, how much risk the other party is willing to absorb to get this done.
Yeah.
This may not be the place they want to use their credibility equity within their organization. And that's also a useful signal. That happens more for if you're working for a startup or a smaller company where people may be reluctant to take a risk on you, but it can also happen working at larger organizations too. But that's what you're trying to figure out is what is that source of objection? So it's listening for those signals and trying to interpret the signals which are either nonverbal or presented opaquely so that rather than just say, this is the problem, if solve
Right.
these three things and we have a deal, which
Right.
rare, I mean, if you get that, that's awesome.
Right. Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I think you hit a couple key things that I mean, now I'm a founder, that's this is some of the problems we're trying to solve. That's what our tool is trying to solve, is really help people understand the buyer motivation more than anything else so that you can ask the right questions, right? Do I have the budget? I hear that sometimes. And I think and then to me that's the signal is this isn't a pain for them or they
Yeah.
don't understand what I'm doing yet. I'm not positioning it right, right? It's a signal to me that says, when you just told me you're not making revenue goals and then you don't think this is the issue, I haven't pitched this right,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, so those are the kind of things that I dig in with that. And that's so and that's what we're really trying to bring out in the signals in NIAC, right? Because there is subtle signals that are happening, verbal, there is body motion, there's eye contact, there is the very one of the things we actually tell everyone to do on the call in some of our EQ hints is make sure you ask for get the next meeting, right?
Yeah.
That's a huge sign of buyer intent, right?
Yeah.
Are they willing to move to the next phase with you, right? Because if they're not and you had what you would consider a great call, then you don't have that next meeting, they're into the maybe world, right? The maybe
Yeah.
yes world.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, so those are super interesting. So, I'm gonna go to, the next thing, which is if you were young, if you were and you would give yourself 1 or 2 pieces of advice on how to be a better salesperson with all the knowledge that you have gained over your years, what would be those 1 or 2 tips that you would tell yourself?
Yeah. I think that one of the things that it took me longer to understand, people said it, but I didn't really understand it, was uh, the power of questions as a salesperson. Spend a lot more time asking questions. People call it discovery, but I think that oversimplifies it or puts it kind of in a jargony box. I think it's really all along the way, you should be asking a lot of questions. And when you're on a sales call, if you find yourself speaking for several minutes without break, you're speaking too much, right? And that you're not asking enough questions. You need to get the other person engaged, not only because it is how you get to that cooperation that we were just speaking about, but also enables you to demonstrate your value better if you understand what it is that they really need to do and what they're looking for. I think that there's some sort of old fashioned, what I would call old fashioned or traditional enterprise sales techniques that I think are unhelpful, like asking someone up front, do you have a budget for this? I've never seen a sales manager who didn't say to his reps, do you know if they have a budget? Well, if it's a new technology that they don't have, I can tell you now, they don't have a budget. They didn't create one for it. Last year, when they created their budgets in Q3 for this year, they didn't know you were going to be calling, right?
Right,
Now, occasionally, if it's like an ERP implementation, sure, that's a big thing. That's a
right,
strategic initiative, and strategic initiatives usually have a budget preset. But if you're selling something new that they didn't plan to buy, they don't have a budget. So how are you going to create that? And from where could the money come? And how is it allocated? So reasonable questions. If you want it, rather than say, do you have a budget? You say, when you guys make off budget decisions, how does it work? What's the business process flow in your company? How do you do it? I think that some of those things by tweaking some of the traditional questions and really making them a little bit more relevant to the buyer, not just relevant to the seller, I
right.
think you make a lot of progress. And it took me a while to kind of really get that in my bones. I don't think I knew that when I started out.
Yeah. That is great advice because we were just talking about this subject internally. We were saying no one has a AI budget for tools that we have, very few anyways, maybe
Mhm.
they have some POCers. So we're coming off budget, but we're coming out of a bucket of money somewhere if they want to
Yeah,
try this, right? So
sure.
what does that process look like to actually make that happen?
Yeah,
And
and it's
I
different
think
at every organization, right?
yes, yes,
Especially again, not if you're talking like a massive ERP implementation or a massive, cloud infrastructure planning. I mean, those things have budgets, but most things probably don't, unless you're replacing an incumbent. But then
right.
your budget is just whatever the last guy was getting paid, or maybe less, 10% less than whatever
Probably
the last
less,
guy got.
yeah.
Yeah, right. Um, so, yeah, I think really understanding what the process internally and who really decides. It's likely going to be a CFO. Does the CFO actually care about how the technology works, or is he going to um, delegate that to the team with whom you're working? He just cares what they're spending and when. Every organization is different. I mean, most
Right.
CFOs care somewhat, but maybe they're not going to dig into the details. So finding what is that process? Does it have to go through purchasing? Can I recommend this directly to finance? Who has to say yes? Which is not the same as saying, do you have a budget?
Right, right. So it's really that process to run it through the gauntlet to get it through so that they're armed with whatever they may need to put your solution forward.
And not just how to get paid, which is the sort of the obvious part of that. What you're really understanding is what is this person's level of influence and decision making within the organization? That's what you're
Right,
really getting to.
right,
You're just asking it in a polite way.
right. Makes sense. So one rapid fire question, thank you for all that wonderful information, is really um what is one thing that AI can't replace in the sales cycle, in a sales? And I think you talked about humans, but like we were talking about, yeah, it can automate things at the beginning, it can automate things at the end. In the middle, we're going to make humans better. What is one thing that you think that they can never, ever replace?
Well, I think that there's like a cliche in sales that I do buy into is that people buy from people they like. I don't think I've ever bought anything from a salesman who was a jerk. Not
Right.
because I refuse to do so. I just don't want to. Like it's not enjoyable. I move on to some other task. I take somebody else's phone call. Now, being friendly is insufficient. I sort of see building rapport and relationship is a necessary but insufficient criterion for closing a deal, especially in the world of complex sales. And so I have not yet seen some of the sort of corner cases we read about where people develop unhealthy relationships with their AI chatbot. Separate from that, I have not seen a place where an AI tool replaces that relationship that
Yeah.
I think is a critical part, again, of complex sales.
Right. And I think, and at NIAC, we completely agree with that, right? We believe the human connection is unique and it changes from person to person, and it's not something, and all the signals and the subtleties, AI can assist a person, but it will never replace it.
I think that's true. Yeah.
So thank you for all the wonderful information, Eitan. Let the viewers know how they can connect with you and any kind of final takeaways you may have for
Yeah,
them.
sure. Well, I'm easily findable on LinkedIn. I'm sure you'll have my name somewhere in this so they can find me. And I think my takeaways are one of the things that's interesting about the work you guys are doing is I think it really breaks down another one of the myths about sales, at least in my opinion, is that some people can sell and some people can't. I don't believe that's true. I think anybody can learn to sell and anybody can become, just like you can become good at math even if you weren't,
Right.
to excel in a sport even if you weren't. Sales is also a learned skill, and not everybody chooses to. That's fine. But anybody, particularly if you're running a startup where you have no choice, but anybody who I fell into a sales function after spending the first 10 years of my career in marketing because I worked in a place where it was necessary.
Right.
Sales is a learned skill, and if there are tools that can shorten that learning cycle, all the better.
Right. I agree with you 100%. I am a CEO, founder-led sales, and I'm learning. I'm a product person by nature, as you know, and I'm learning sales, and tools like this help me a lot because I I do the chatty Cathy where I'm feature dumping, right? Like, "My tool is so great because I built it." And it's always like, "Be quiet. No, really be quiet. No, really listen," right?
Yeah.
And all these little tips that we're, like, putting in there, like how to dig in, into the process of how you will be paid. Well, not paid, how is there budget or what does it look like for something like this, right? I,
Yeah.
I love the words that you just use. I'm going to use those and put them as a tip into my culture because I think that is brilliant. If you're off budget or you don't have budget, like how does that process work so that I can really understand that person on the other and where they are in their organization and how this would work, right? Because
Yeah.
as you said, I think for startups, really, they don't have a budget line. Startup costs tryouts, right? $100,000. That doesn't exist in budgets.
Yeah,
So,
but there may be, for example, like if it's, a tool like Nike, they probably have a learning and development budget, but they're
right,
not thinking of you that way. They may have a
right,
sales training budget. They may have um, sort of a placeholder for, well, this is going to be for team projects or for offsites. All of these things could end up being where you fit. And
right,
that's true for any business, that you just need to be not suggesting that they will bring money out of thin air, but they're not thinking about it the way you're thinking about it because there is, as you say, no line item budget for specifically what you're selling.
right, right. Makes sense. So thank you again. Wonderful. And it's been a delight. And as I said, you are an inspiration to me, and it has always been a great time to work with you.
You're
So
very
thank
kind.
you
I've always
very
enjoyed it too. And thank you for having me today. Okay, bye.